My name is Margot Hayes, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. The funeral for my husband, Ernest, was the quietest day of my existence. There, beside his grave, I received a message from an unknown number that sent a chill through me. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket," I replied, my hands trembling. "Who are you?" The response took my breath away. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." That moment tore my soul in two. My world crumbled when I saw Charles and Henry, my own sons, standing by the casket with strangely calm expressions. Something was wrong. Their tears seemed forced, their hugs as cold as ice. For 42 years, Ernest had been my partner, my refuge, my reason for living. I met him when I was 24 in the small town of Spring Creek. We grew up on the same dusty back roads, sharing modest dreams. I cleaned houses to support my sick mother, while Ernest repaired bicycles in a small shop he inherited from his father. We were poor, but we were happy. We had something money couldn't buy. Real love. I remember the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning. I was walking toward the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He stepped out of his shop with grease-stained hands and smiled at me with a shyness that made me fall in love with him instantly. "Good morning, Margot," he said in a soft voice. "Need me to check out your bike?" I didn't own a bike, but I came up with an excuse just to talk to him. That conversation turned into dates under the big old oak tree in Town Square Park, then into promises of eternal love, and finally, into a simple wedding full of hope. The first few years were hard. We lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof. When it rained, we'd set out pots all over the house to catch the leaks. But we were happy. Ernest worked from sunup to sundown in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women in town. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would burst with happiness. He was a beautiful baby with his father's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, just as perfect. I raised them with all the love in the world, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. Ernest was a wonderful father. He'd take them fishing in the river on Sundays, teach them to fix things with their hands, and tell them stories before bed. I fed them, dressed them, and comforted them when they cried. We were a close family, or so I believed. As they grew up, things started to change. Charles, the oldest, was always ambitious. From a young age, he'd ask why we lived so modestly, why we didn't have a car like other families. Henry followed his lead in everything, as he always had. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a job at the shop, but he rejected it with contempt. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Those words hurt Ernest deeply, though he never said it to me. I'd see him sitting on the porch at night, staring at the stars with a look of sadness. His son had rejected not only his work, but his entire way of life. The years passed, and to my surprise, Charles managed to make a name for himself in the business world. He got a job at a real estate company in the city. Henry followed soon after. They both started making money, far more than Ernest and I had ever seen. At first, I was so proud. My sons had achieved what we never could, escaping poverty and building a better life. But little by little, that joy turned into sadness. Visits became less frequent, and phone calls grew shorter. When they did come, they arrived in expensive cars, dressed in fancy suits, talking about investments and properties. They'd look at us with a strange mix of pity and shame. "Mom," Charles said to me during one of their sporadic visits, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right. But that house held all our memories. It was where we'd raised our sons, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd grown old together. It wasn't fancy, but it was our home. Ernest, always wise, would tell me, "Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I resisted believing it. I kept justifying their absences, their brief calls, their broken promises. "They're busy building their lives," I'd tell myself. "Someday they'll be the loving boys we raised again." But in my heart, I knew Ernest was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just didn't know to what extent we had become strangers to them. The most drastic change came when Charles married Jasmine Albright, a woman from the city who never hid her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time he brought her home, she arrived in high heels that sank into the dirt of our porch and an elegant red dress that looked more expensive than everything I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, barely extending the tips of her fingers to greet me. Her eyes scanned our humble home with an expression I couldn't decipher, but that made me feel small. During dinner, Jasmine barely touched the food I had prepared with so much love. She moved the meatloaf around on her plate and cut tiny pieces of chicken, but she ate almost nothing. Charles seemed nervous, constantly apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Next time, we'll take them out to a restaurant," he whispered to Jasmine, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard him. Every word pierced my heart like a knife. Henry, for his part, remained single, but adopted the same distant attitude as his brother. His visits were limited to special occasions, and even then, he always seemed to be in a hurry to leave. He was constantly on his phone, closing deals even during our conversations. "Mom, I have to go," he'd always say before it was time. "I have an important meeting early tomorrow." Family Sundays became a distant memory. Christmases grew cold and formal. My sons would bring expensive gifts we didn't need. They'd stay for 2 or 3 hours and then leave with evident relief. Ernest and I grew old alone, comforting each other. He continued to work in his shop, though his hands no longer had the same strength. I continued with my sewing, but my eyes weren't the same. We made do with our small income, proud not to ask for anything from our successful sons. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Margot?" Ernest said to me one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "It's not that they have money. It's that the money has made them believe we aren't important anymore." He was right, as always. My sons hadn't just changed financially. They had changed in their hearts. We were no longer their beloved parents. We were an uncomfortable reminder of a past they wanted to forget. Things got worse when Charles bought a $200,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood in the city. Henry did the same soon after, investing in a luxury condo that cost $150,000. Suddenly, our sons were owners of fortunes we couldn't even imagine. "You should sell this house and move into a retirement community," Jasmine suggested during one of her rare visits. "There are some very nice places for people your age. You'd be more comfortable." The word community hit me like a slap. A retirement community. After 40 years of building our home, after raising these sons with so much love, they wanted to send us to a home. "We don't need a home," Ernest replied with the dignity that always characterized him. "We're fine here in our house." But I saw the expression on Charles and Henry's faces. They supported Jasmine's idea. To them, we were a burden, a problem to be solved in the most convenient way. It was then that the more direct suggestions began. Charles arrived one day with papers in his hand, documents he had prepared without consulting us. "Dad, Mom," he said with that fake smile he had perfected, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth, at most, $1,000. If you sell it, I can add some money so you can move somewhere better. A better place." To us, there was no place better than the home where we had been happy for decades. But Charles didn't understand that. For him, everything came down to numbers, to monetary value. "Besides," he continued, "I think Dad should retire from the shop. He's already 70 years old. It's time to rest." Ernest looked at him with infinite sadness. "Son, working isn't a burden for me. It's what keeps me alive, what gives meaning to my days." "But you could get hurt," Henry insisted, backing up his brother as he always did. "At your age, an accident would be very dangerous." Their words sounded caring, but I sensed something more behind them, an impatience, an urgency I couldn't fully grasp. The following months were tense. My sons increased the pressure for us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without telling us. They had it appraised without our permission. They even began to talk about what would be best for everyone. "Look," Charles said to us during one particularly uncomfortable dinner, "Jasmine and I have decided to have kids soon. We'll need help with the expenses. If you sell the house and move to a smaller place, that money could be an early inheritance. An early inheritance. He was asking for our inheritance while we were still alive. The audacity of the request left me speechless. Ernest remained calm, but I saw his jaw tense. Son, when your mother and I die, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our decisions are our own. Don't be stubborn, Henry cut in, with a harshness I had never seen from him before. You're old now. You can't keep living in the past. That night, after they left, Ernest and I stayed up talking until dawn. For the first time in our marriage, we discussed the possibility that our sons were not the people we thought we had raised. Something's wrong, Margot, my husband said to me with a look of worry I had never seen in his eyes. This isn't just ambition or impatience. There's something darker behind all this pressure. I had no idea how profoundly correct his words were. I couldn't imagine that my own sons were planning something that would change our lives forever. I didn't know that the tragedy that was coming wouldn't be an accident of fate, but a conspiracy carefully orchestrated by the two people I trusted most in the world. The last normal conversation I had with Charles was 3 weeks before Ernest's death. He came alone, without Jasmine, and looked more serious than usual. Mom, he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast so many times as a boy, I want you to know that no matter what happens, Henry and I will always take care of you. His words soothed me at the time, but now, remembering them beside Ernest's grave, they send a shiver down my spine. Why did he say, no matter what happens? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Ernest had left early for the shop, as he had done every day for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with an urgency that sent a chill through me. Mrs. Hayes, a voice I didn't know asked. I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The words blurred in my mind like ink and water. The world stopped. My legs turned to jelly, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. What happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? Ma'am, please come as soon as possible. The trip to the hospital was a hazy nightmare. My neighbor, Doris, had to drive me because I was shaking so much I couldn't even hold the keys. The whole way there, my mind refused to process what was happening. Ernest was careful, meticulous in his work. How could this have happened? When we got to the hospital, Charles and Henry were already there. That surprised me because no one had notified them yet. At least not me. But in my desperation, I didn't pay attention to that detail. Mom, Charles said, hugging me with a force that seemed genuine. Dad is in bad shape. The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a traumatic brain injury. Henry's eyes were red, but something in his expression felt off. He seemed more nervous than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone suffering for his father. Can we see him? I asked, desperate. Only immediate family, one at a time, and for 5 minutes max, the nurse explained. When I entered that ICU room, my heart sank. Ernest was hooked up to a dozen machines with bandages covering most of his face and arms. I barely recognized him. His breathing was labored, artificial, kept going by machines that beeped constantly. I walked up to his bed and took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed intact. Ernest, my love, I'm here. Everything is going to be all right. You're going to recover, just like you always do. For a moment, I felt a slight squeeze in my hand. His eyes moved behind his closed lids. He was fighting. My warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room. Charles and Henry took turns accompanying me, but they always seemed more interested in talking to the doctors than in comforting their father. I overheard fragmented conversations that I couldn't fully understand at the time. Henry asked about medical insurance, about the cost of treatment. Charles was on the phone talking about life insurance policies and beneficiaries. Mom, Charles said to me on the second day, we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life insurance policy for $50,000. There's also a workers' comp policy that could cover up to $75,000 more. Why was he talking to me about money when Ernest was still fighting for his life? Why was he worried about insurance instead of his father's recovery? I don't care about the money, I responded harshly. I just want your dad to get better. Of course, Mom, he said, but I saw something in his eyes that I didn't like. A coldness, a calculator working while his father lay dying. On the third day, the doctors gave us the most devastating news of my life. Dr. Patterson, an older man with a compassionate expression, gathered us in a small office. Mrs. Hayes, he began softly, your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the head trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We have to be realistic about his chances. What does that mean? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. It means we need to prepare for the worst. Your husband is in an induced coma. We could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life, well, it's highly unlikely he will ever regain consciousness. My world fell apart around me. 42 years of marriage, an entire life built together, and now they were telling me it was all fading away like smoke. We want to try everything, I said through sobs, no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. But Charles exchanged a look with Henry that deeply unsettled me. Mom, Charles said in a voice that tried to sound understanding, we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden on anyone. A burden. I exploded with a fury I didn't know I had. He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his whole life to give you the best he could. We know, Mom, Henry chimed in. But we also have to think about you. The medical bills are going to be enormous. They could wipe out all your savings. Again, money. Always money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating costs. That night, alone in the hospital room, I took Ernest's hand and spoke to him as if he could hear me. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine my life without you. It was then that something happened that still gives me goosebumps. His fingers moved slightly, squeezing mine with a force that was almost imperceptible. His lips moved as if he were trying to say something, but no sound came out. I called for the nurses, desperate. He's reacting! He's trying to talk! But by the time they arrived, Ernest had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernest had tried to communicate with me. He had fought to tell me something important. 2 days later, in the early hours of Friday morning, the machine alarms went off. Lights flashed. Nurses rushed to Ernest's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the noise woke me up. No, no, no! I screamed, running toward the room. The doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. At 4:37 in the morning, Ernest was officially declared dead. The pain I felt in that moment was physical, as if my heart had been ripped from my chest. I collapsed by his bed, hugging his still warm body, refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Charles and Henry arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if they had been expecting the call. They brought papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. We already talked to the Spring Creek Funeral Home, Charles said to me while I was still crying inconsolably. They can pick up the body this morning. We also contacted the insurance, Henry added. The claim process is already underway. How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold just an hour after losing their father? Something was wrong, but my grief was so intense that I couldn't think clearly. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Charles took care of all the arrangements without really consulting me. He chose the simplest casket, the shortest service, as if he wanted to get it all over with as quickly as possible. It's what Dad would have wanted, he said when I complained about not being included in the decisions. Something simple without a fuss. but Ernest deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget. The day of the funeral arrived, cloudy and cold, as if the sky itself were crying for Ernest. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn for my mother's funeral years ago. My hands were shaking so much that Doris had to help me button the small buttons on the back. "Be strong, Margot," my dear friend whispered as she carefully combed my hair. "Ernest would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage can't be buried so easily. Every object in the house reminded me of him: his coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow that still held his scent. When we got to the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people had attended. I expected to see more of Ernest's co-workers from the shop, more neighbors, more acquaintances. But it was only Charles, Henry, Jasmine, Doris, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town, who had helped so many people, the funeral seemed strangely empty. "Where are the guys from the shop?" I asked Charles. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he replied quickly. "Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate." But that wasn't true. Ernest loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them to come say goodbye. Why had Charles decided to make everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with a strange emotional detachment. Charles had a solemn expression, appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted toward his watch. Henry seemed restless, as if he had more important things to do. Jasmine discreetly checked her phone behind her black veil. This was how they were saying goodbye to their father, with impatience and distractions. The pastor spoke about eternal life, about well-deserved rest, about reuniting with God. His words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, for us to keep growing old together, for us to keep drinking coffee on the porch every evening. When it was time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to hold me up. Doris had to support me as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of the dirt hitting the wood was final, conclusive, hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing by my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters danced in front of my eyes as if I were hallucinating. I was losing my mind from the grief. With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The answer came immediately. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone fell from my hands as if it were burning. Doris bent down to pick it up, but I stopped her abruptly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. "Are you okay, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching with a worried expression. I stared at him, trying to find some clue on his face. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, putting the phone in my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, I couldn't get those messages out of my head. Was it possible that someone was playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life? Or was there really a possibility that Ernest was alive? But if he was alive, who had we buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in my house, which now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every detail of the last few days. Ernest's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Charles, a machine had exploded in the shop. But Ernest knew every screw and wire in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. Plus, how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had notified them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know about the accident before I did? And then there was the money. From day one, Charles and Henry had talked about insurance, policies, and beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to check Ernest's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all his important documents in a metal box. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, shop documents, everything was there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy that Charles had mentioned. But there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance? He had never mentioned that change to me, and more importantly, who had suggested he do it? I kept looking and found something even more disturbing. A workers' comp policy that I didn't know about, purchased just 2 months before his death. $5,000 in case of accidental death on the job. $15,000 in total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a fortune tempting enough for someone without scruples. My phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time, I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details that only someone very close to us could know. The next day, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had kept our account for 30 years. Mrs. Thompson, the manager who had known us forever, greeted me with sincere condolences. "Margot, I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I came to check our accounts. I need to understand our financial situation." She showed me the bank statements from the last 6 months. What I saw froze me. Over the past 3 months, large withdrawals had been made from our savings account. $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money that I didn't know had been moved. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your husband came in person," Mrs. Thompson explained. "He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop." But I kept the household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent. Ernest had never mentioned expensive repairs at the shop, and we definitely had never talked about withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. "Do you have the signatures for those withdrawals?" I asked. She showed me the receipts. Indeed, it looked like Ernest's signature, but something about the handwriting seemed off. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. "Mrs. Thompson," I asked with my heart pounding, "did he come alone to make these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I think he came in with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses." Charles. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I didn't know about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I looked over the bank receipts again and again, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence piling up in front of me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's presence in transactions I knew nothing about, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, his coldness during his father's agony. But the question that terrified me was whether they had really planned Ernest's death, how they had done it, and who was sending me these messages. How did this person know so much about what had happened? The following days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every one of Charles's smiles, every one of Henry's hugs, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept a truth as horrible as the one taking shape in my mind. My phone kept receiving messages from the mysterious number. "Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see." I decided to go to the shop for the first time since the accident. Charles had said a machine had exploded, but when I got there, I found something completely different from what I expected. The shop was strangely clean, too clean to have been the scene of an explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction that such a serious accident should have caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I asked out loud. I looked all over the shop and found every machine in its place, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were intact. What then had been the cause of the accident? In Ernest's desk, I found something that sent a chill through me. a note written in his handwriting dated 3 days before his death. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Below that note was another. Henry brought me some papers to sign. He says they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what it's about. Why all the hurry? My husband had had suspicions. He had intuited the evil intentions of our sons, but he had died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found an envelope sealed with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Ernest. "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They're too interested in our money, in the insurance, in us selling the house. Jasmine is putting a lot of pressure on them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Margot. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons." The letter fell from my hands. Ernest had sensed his own death. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had ignored. That night, Charles came to visit me. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely fake. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted one. "The insurance money. It's already in process. It'll be $15,000. "How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to make sure you had enough money to live comfortably." A lie. Ernest had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own note, he had been pressured by Charles. "And what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, carefully watching his reaction. His eyes lit up with a glint that gave me a chill. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house, or even better, move into a nice retirement community where you'd have company and medical care. Henry and I could manage your money to make it go further." "Manage my money. We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple my money or make it disappear into their own pockets." "Let me think about it," I said, trying to buy time. "Of course," Jasmine said with her fake sweetness. "But not too long, for your own good." After they left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with rage and fear. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a longer message than the others. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about." The next day, I went to the local police station. Sergeant O'Connell, who had known Ernest for years, greeted me kindly. "The report on your husband's accident?" he asked with a confused expression. "What accident, Mrs. Hayes?" "From his shop, when the machine exploded." The sergeant checked his files and shook his head. "We don't have any report of an explosion at Ernest's shop here. In fact, we don't have any report of a work accident involving your husband." I felt the world sway under my feet. But my son said it was an accident at the shop. That's why he was in the hospital." "Mrs. Hayes, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a work accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of poisoning." Poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. The hospital should have informed you of this. Poisoning. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a work accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. "Why didn't anyone tell me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. The immediate family who signed the hospital papers requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family. Charles and Henry had hidden the true cause of Ernest's condition, invented the story of the explosion, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up a murder. "Mrs. Hayes," the sergeant continued. "If you suspect the circumstances of your husband's death, we could open a formal investigation." I had more than suspicions. I was certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Henry came home with a bouquet of flowers and the same fake smile as Charles. "How are you, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine," I lied, observing his every gesture from a new perspective. "I'm just thinking about the future." "That's good. Charles and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon while it's fresh on the real estate market." "Why the rush?" "Well, old houses lose value quickly, and you need liquidity. Funeral expenses, pending medical bills, more lies." The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because the hospital insurance had covered them. "Henry," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "you knew your dad didn't die from a work accident." For a fraction of a second, I saw panic in his expression, but he recovered quickly. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "I went to the police station. There's no report of an explosion at your dad's shop." This time the panic was more evident. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. They'll confuse you. The grief is getting to you." "The grief is getting to me, or you've been lying to me." He got up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had poured for him. "I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're calmer." He left quickly, but not before making a phone call from the porch. Although I couldn't hear the words, the tone was urgent, worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. "They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're crazy, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." The mysterious message's prediction came true exactly as it had warned. The next day, Charles and Henry arrived together at my house, accompanied by Jasmine. They had expressions of exaggerated concern and a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. "Mom, we're so worried about you," Charles began in a sugary voice. "The neighbors have told us you've been acting strange. Doris says you've been talking to yourself, that you aren't eating well." Doris had never said that. It was just another lie in their growing collection. "Jasmine brought your favorite pastries," Henry added, pointing to the bag. "And we made special coffee from that brand you like so much." I remembered the message's words. "Don't take anything they offer you to eat or drink." It was possible that they were planning to poison me, too, just as they had Ernest. "Thank you, but I already had breakfast," I said, keeping my distance. "But Mom," Jasmine insisted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you need to eat properly. You've lost a lot of weight since Dad Ernest died." "I'm fine," I repeated firmly. Charles exchanged a significant look with Henry. It was the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor gave us Ernest's prognosis. "Mom," Charles said, sitting closer to me, "we want to talk to you about something important. Henry and I have been consulting with some doctors about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes. The strange questions you've been asking, the visits to the police station, that obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after such a great loss, but it can be dangerous if it's not treated." Henry nodded gravely. "We spoke to Dr. Albright. He says it's common for older people to develop paranoia after losing a partner, especially women your age." Paranoia. They were accusing me of being crazy for uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said with all the firmness I could muster. "I'm just asking questions I should have asked from the beginning." "What questions?" Charles challenged me. "Like why there's no police report for your father's supposed accident. Like why the shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion. Like why you withdrew $5,000 from our account without telling me anything." The silence that followed was deafening. The three of them exchanged looks of thinly disguised panic. "Mom," Henry finally said, "those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for repairs he wanted to do in secret as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to remodel the house," Charles lied. "He had hired some workers to fix the roof and paint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." If that were true, Where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why did no one in town know about this supposed remodeling? And about the police report, Charles continued, not all work accidents require a report, especially when they happen on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been very clear. Any work accident with serious injuries requires an official report. Mom, Jasmine intervened with a sweet but condescending voice, we just want to take care of you. That's why we thought it would be best if you moved to a place with specialized medical attention. A home. A specialized care home, Charles corrected, for people who are going through complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you busy. And in the meantime, Henry added, we can take care of selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated things you shouldn't have to handle in your current state. There it was, the complete plan. Declare me mentally incompetent, put me in a home, and take control of all my money. First, they had murdered Ernest for the insurance money, and now they wanted to steal from me too. And what if I refuse? I asked them. Why would you refuse? Charles asked with a smile that sent a chill through me. We just want what's best for you. Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Ernest. This is where I raised you. Mom, Henry said with an exaggerated sigh, you can't live in the past forever. Dad is gone. You have to accept it and move on. I have accepted it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give away my life and my money. The mask of concern began to crack on my sons' faces. Charles got up abruptly. All right. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more drastic measures. What does that mean? It means we can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors who confirm you're suffering from senile paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? I hadn't spoken to any doctors about my mental state. Dr. Albright already signed a preliminary report, Henry added. He says that based on our descriptions of your behavior, it's likely you need specialized care. A doctor who had never examined me had signed a report about my mental state based only on what my sons had told him. How much had it cost them to buy that false evaluation? So you can cooperate voluntarily, Charles continued, or we can do it legally, but either way, you're going to get the help you need. It was a direct threat. If I didn't hand over my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it from me. I need time to think about it, I told them, trying to buy time. Of course, Jasmine said with her false sweetness, but not too much time, for your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear. My own sons, the blood of my blood, had not only murdered their father, but now they were planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a message longer than the others. Margot, this is Stephen Callahan, a private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died because he was suspicious of Charles and Henry. They poisoned him with methanol mixed in his breakfast coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 p.m, go to the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. At last, I would know who had been sending me those messages, and more importantly, I would have the proof I needed to get justice for my husband's death. But I also knew I didn't have much time. Charles and Henry had shown their hand. If I didn't act fast, I'd end up locked in a home while they spent the money that had cost Ernest his life. The war had begun, and even if I was a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't: the truth. And the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to come out. That night, for the first time since Ernest's death, I smiled, because I knew my husband had not died in vain. His caution, his instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator was going to allow me to get justice. Charles and Henry had seriously underestimated their mother. They were about to discover that a woman fighting for the memory of her murdered husband is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day arrived, filled with nervousness and anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious purple dress, the one I wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could give me the answers I needed, I wanted to be prepared for any revelation. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I walked toward the corner cafe with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they had accused me of having was starting to feel justified. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the back table as I had been instructed. I ordered a chamomile tea and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn wooden table. Exactly at 3 on the dot, a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall and gray-haired, with intelligent eyes and a serious but kind expression. He was carrying a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked in a low voice. I nodded, not yet trusting my voice. "I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm so sorry for your loss." Ernest was a good man. He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table. "Before I show you what I have, I need you to know that what you're about to hear and see is going to be very painful. Are you ready?" "I've been getting ready since I received your first message," I replied, with a firmness I didn't know I had. Stephen opened the folder and took out a small voice recorder. "Ernest came to see me a month ago. He was worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly." He pressed the play button. Ernest's voice, so familiar and dear, filled the small space between us. "Stephen, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Charles and Henry have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Charles brought me papers he said were to better protect Margot. But when I read them, I realized there were also clauses that directly benefited them. My heart sped up. Hearing Ernest's voice was like having him back for a few minutes, but his words confirmed my worst suspicions. The recording continued. "Henry has been asking strange questions about my daily routine, what I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, if Margot comes to the shop with me. He says it's out of concern, but something about the way he asks worries me." Stephen paused the recording. "This conversation was 3 weeks before his death, but I have something more recent." He played another recording, this time with Charles's voice in the background talking on the phone. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is starting to get suspicious. Yesterday he asked me why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It works perfectly because the symptoms look like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated that we can do whatever we want with her." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. It was the voice of my son, my own son, coldly planning his father's murder. "There's more," Stephen said softly. "This recording is from the day before Ernest's death." A new recording began. This time, it was Henry talking to someone. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow Charles is going to put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement a doctor recommended. The idiot is going to drink it without suspecting a thing. The symptoms? It'll start with dizziness and confusion, then loss of sight, convulsions, coma. The doctors will think it's a stroke or a heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late." My world completely collapsed. Not only had they planned Ernest's murder, but they had executed it with a coldness that terrified me. How was it possible that my sons, the babies I had nursed, the boys I had comforted through their nightmares, were capable of something so monstrous? "How did you get these recordings?" I asked through my sobs. "Ernest had asked me to put listening devices in your house," Stephen explained. He was afraid, but he didn't know exactly what of. "We placed them on the home phone and in some other strategic spots." He took out a series of photographs from the folder. "I also have this. Charles buying methanol at a hardware store 30 miles from town. He paid with cash and used a fake name, but I have it on video." The photographs clearly showed Charles leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date on the photos was 5 days before Ernest's death. "And this," Stephen continued, showing me more documents. "These are Charles and Henry's financial records from the last 6 months. They've been spending a lot more money than their incomes justify. Charles owes $70,000 to a lender in the city. Henry has gambling debts for $40,000. They were desperate." It all started to make sense. It wasn't just greed that had motivated Ernest's murder. It was financial desperation. My sons were ruined and saw their father as a source of easy, fast money. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately after Ernest's death?" I asked him. "Because Charles and Henry are very smart. They bribed the doctor who attended to Ernest at the hospital to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate says heart failure due to complications from a work accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not have been enough for a conviction. But now we have all the evidence together," I said, feeling a mix of pain and determination. "Exactly. And there's one more thing you need to know." My blood ran cold. "What?" "Your sons were planning to kill you too." Stephen played one last recording, this time with Charles and Henry's voices together. "Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too," Charles said. "We can't risk her getting suspicious or anyone else putting ideas in her head." "How?" Henry asked. "The same as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like a suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it. And the money? We're her only heirs. Everything would be ours. The house, the savings, the insurance money, almost $200,000 in total." The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but they were planning to murder me as well, all for money. "Mrs. Hayes," Stephen said gently, "I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence to make them pay for what they did. What do we do now?" I asked, wiping my tears. "First, we need to go to the police with all this evidence. Sergeant O'Connell is an honest man. He's not involved in the corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, it will be much harder to proceed legally." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They're meeting with Judge Miller at 10 in the morning to start the mental incapacitation process." I got up from the table with a determination I hadn't felt in weeks. "Then, we have to act tonight." "Exactly," Stephen confirmed. "But first, there's one more thing I want to show you." He took one last photograph from the folder. In it, Ernest was leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went to get a full medical exam at a clinic in the city. The results show that he was perfectly healthy. There were no signs of heart disease, his blood pressure was normal, everything was perfect. This definitively proves that his death was caused by poisoning, not by natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Ernest had been a healthy man, murdered by his own sons. "Stephen," I said, taking his hand, "thank you for keeping your promise to my husband. Now, let's get justice." That same night, Stephen and I went directly to the police station. Sergeant O'Connell was working the night shift that week, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived, it was 8 in the evening, and the station was relatively quiet. "Sergeant O'Connell," I said in a firm voice, "I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Ernest." The sergeant looked at me with surprise. "Murder? Mrs. Hayes, the death certificate says he died from heart complications after a work accident." "The death certificate is false," I replied, placing Stephen's folder on his desk. "My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own sons." For the next 2 hours, Stephen and I presented all the evidence. The audio recordings, the photographs of Charles buying methanol, the bank documents showing the unauthorized withdrawals, Ernest's medical results proving his perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed to both their father's murder and their plans to kill me. Sergeant O'Connell listened to each recording with an increasingly serious expression. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous," he murmured. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Mrs. Hayes? Once we arrest your sons, there's no turning back." "Sergeant," I replied, with all the dignity I could muster, "those men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me too. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes. We'll need the medical examiner to exhume Ernest's body to confirm the presence of methanol," the sergeant explained. "Are you prepared for that?" Do whatever is necessary, I replied without hesitation. Sergeant O'Connell immediately called the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the seriousness of the case led the DA to come to the station personally. After reviewing all the evidence, he immediately authorized arrest warrants for Charles and Henry. We'll proceed at dawn, the DA explained to us. We need to make sure we have all the evidence before they can destroy any additional proof. Stephen walked me home that night. Are you sure you'll be okay alone? He asked with concern. I'll be fine, I replied. After everything I've discovered, I'm no longer afraid. I have justice on my side. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up sitting in the kitchen, looking at the photographs of Ernest we had on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction, knowing that justice for his murder was coming soon. At 6 a.m, my phone rang. It was Charles. Mom, you need to come to Henry's house right away. Something terrible has happened. What happened? I asked, feigning concern. It's better if I explain it in person. Please, come quickly. I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to move up their plans to get rid of me. But I also knew the police were already on their way to arrest them. I'm on my way, I lied. Instead of going to Henry's house, I stayed in my kitchen, waiting. At 7:30 a.m, I saw from my window as several police cars headed toward my son's houses in different directions. My phone rang repeatedly for the next hour. First Charles, then Henry, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was, but I didn't answer any calls. At 9 a.m, Sergeant O'Connell knocked on my door. Mrs. Hayes, we've arrested Charles and Henry. They are in police custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. I felt my legs tremble, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from relief. How did they react? I asked. Charles denied everything at first, but when we played the recordings for him, he collapsed. Henry tried to escape through the back window of his house. We had to chase him for 6 blocks. That afternoon, Jasmine came to see me. She arrived sobbing, pleading, completely different from the cold, calculating woman I had known. Mrs. Hayes, please, you have to drop the charges against Charles. He's not bad. He was just desperate because of his debts. This is my fault too. I pressured him a lot to find money. I looked at her without a trace of compassion. Jasmine, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me too. There is no explanation or justification for that. But we're family, she screamed in desperation. Think about what this is going to do to the family. The family died the day you decided to kill Ernest for money, I replied coldly. Now please, leave my house. 3 days later, the exhumation of Ernest's body was carried out. The lab results confirmed exactly what Stephen had discovered: lethal levels of methanol in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before his death. The case became a sensation throughout the town. No one could believe that 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. The local newspapers called it the cruelest crime of the decade. Over the following weeks, more details came to light during the investigation. Charles really owed $7,000 to illegal lenders who had started threatening him with violence. Henry had lost $5,000 in underground gambling dens and was also facing threats. They had seen Ernest's life insurance money as their only salvation, but their greed had led them to increase the policies so dramatically that it had aroused their own father's suspicion. We also discovered that the doctor who had falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 in cash from Charles. He was also arrested for obstructing justice and falsifying official documents. Stephen explained all the details of the plan Ernest had made with him. Your husband was smarter than his sons believed. He knew something bad was coming, but he didn't know exactly what. He hired me not only to investigate Charles and Henry, but also to protect you if something happened to him. Did he know they were going to kill him? I asked. Not exactly, Stephen said, But he suspected his life was in danger. That's why we installed the recording devices. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, the truth would come to light. My Ernest, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and had taken steps to ensure that justice would prevail. The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Charles and Henry faced charges of first-degree murder, which in our state carried a sentence of 25 years to life. The day of the trial arrived after 2 months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was completely full. Reporters from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the case of the killer sons. The whole town was there. Neighbors, former co-workers of Ernest, even people I barely knew, but who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my best black dress, the same one I had worn for our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented mourning and dignity. Stephen accompanied me, sitting by my side throughout the entire process. His presence gave me the strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Charles and Henry entered the courtroom in handcuffs, dressed in orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart one more time, but I no longer felt pity for them. I only felt a deep sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they physically murdered their father. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. The silence was absolute every time the voices of Charles and Henry were heard, coldly planning Ernest's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they planned to kill me too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. One elderly woman got up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was difficult to process such cruelty. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said during his opening statement, this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is a case of cold and calculated premeditation, where 2 men decided to murder the father who had raised them with love and sacrifice simply because they needed money to pay off their gambling debts and irresponsible loans. Charles and Henry's lawyers tried to present a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of the methanol in Ernest's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs, but a clear mind. I had been waiting for this moment for months. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor asked me, can you tell us what your relationship was like with your sons before your husband's murder? I thought I had a good relationship with them, I replied, looking directly at Charles and Henry. I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sunup to sundown to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the reason for his murder. At any point, did you suspect they could harm your husband? No. That is the most painful part of all this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Ernest had an accident at his shop, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up a murder. Charles lowered his head during my testimony. Henry looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears in his eyes. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor decided to play the full recording of the conversation where they planned my own murder. Charles's voice filled the courtroom. Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious. A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of disbelief and compassion. How did you feel when you heard this recording for the first time? The prosecutor asked me. I realized that I had lost my 2 sons long before I lost my husband, I replied, my voice cracking but firm. The babies I nursed, the children I comforted in their nightmares, had died and been replaced by 2 strangers capable of any cruelty for money. The defense tried to cross-examine me. suggesting that maybe I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that maybe the grief had made me exaggerate the evidence, but the recordings spoke for themselves. Stephen also testified, explaining in detail how Ernest had hired him because he was afraid of his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every piece of evidence collected, every recorded moment that revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented the results of the exhumation, confirming the lethal presence of methanol in Ernest's body. He explained how this poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband had experienced before he died. After 3 days of devastating testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was crushing. Charles and Henry are not victims of circumstances. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles that had to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Ernest's murder, and were planning to do the same to Margot. They don't deserve compassion. They deserve justice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. I could hear the beating of my own heart as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the state versus Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes on the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Charles collapsed in his chair, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had done. Henry remained rigid, staring straight ahead with no expression. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margot Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The judge proceeded immediately to the sentencing. Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Ernest. After the trial, many people came up to hug me and express their support. Doris cried with me, not from sadness, but from relief. "Margot, Ernest can rest in peace now," she whispered to me. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Ernest and I had been happy for 42 years. Stephen came to visit me a week after the trial. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "At peace," I answered honestly. "For the first time since Ernest's death, I sleep soundly. I know he is resting because his death did not go unpunished." "And the money, the insurance, the savings?" "I donated the life insurance money to a foundation for victims of family crimes," I explained. "That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My personal savings are enough to live modestly for the rest of my days." 6 months after the trial, I received a letter in prison mail. It was from Charles. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret everything. The money, the debts, the desperation. They blinded us. We lost all humanity. Henry and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for $5,000 that we didn't even get to enjoy. Tomorrow, I will commit suicide in my cell. I can't live with what we did. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such bad sons. I didn't arrive in time to prevent his suicide." Charles was found hanging in his cell the next day. Henry, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I have converted Ernest's shop into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Stephen has become a close friend, visiting me regularly to make sure I'm okay. Sometimes the neighbors ask me if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Ernest did. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Ernest was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during the trial are my family now. Justice did not bring Ernest back, but it gave me peace. And on quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often drank coffee together, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing, even when it meant losing my sons forever. 5 years have passed since that terrible day in the cemetery when I received the first message that changed my life forever. Today I am 71 years old, and my completely white hair reflects all the storms I have faced and overcome. But my eyes, my dear friend Doris tells me, shine with a peace they didn't have before. The house where Ernest and I built our dreams is still my refuge. I have made some improvements with the money I had saved. I painted the walls a soft yellow, Ernest's favorite color, and I turned his old shop into the most beautiful garden in the neighborhood. Red roses, white carnations, sunflowers that always seek the sun, just as he taught me to do during our most difficult years. Stephen Callahan became more than just the investigator who helped me get justice. He became my chosen family. He comes to visit me every Wednesday afternoon, and we drink coffee on the porch while he tells me stories about his other cases. He sometimes asks me if I regret reporting my own sons, if it wouldn't have been better to keep the secret and live with the lie. Never, I always answer. The truth hurts, but lies kill the soul. The foundation I established with the life insurance money has become something bigger than I ever imagined. The Ernest Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes now helps dozens of families every year who have gone through tragedies similar to mine. We have psychologists, lawyers, and private investigators all working so that no other family has to suffer in silence what I suffered. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman came to see me. Her name was Eleanor, and she suspected her brother had murdered her mother for the inheritance. Her story was painfully similar to mine. Greedy relatives, pressure to sell properties, strange behavior after the death. The foundation provided her with a private investigator, free legal advice, and psychological support throughout the process. When her brother was convicted of murder 3 months later, Eleanor came to hug me, crying, "Mrs. Hayes, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your own sons, I never would have had the courage to report mine." Those are the moments that remind me why all the pain I went through was worth it. Henry is still alive, though he is no longer the same man I knew. After Charles's suicide, his mind completely broke. The doctors say he lives in a constant state of guilt and paranoia, believing that Ernest comes to visit him every night to scold him for the murder. He has tried to commit suicide 3 times, but the prison guards keep him under constant surveillance. I receive letters from him occasionally. They are incoherent, full of desperate apologies and pleas for forgiveness. At first I read them, looking for some trace of the son I raised with so much love. But then I realized that reading those letters only reopened wounds that had already healed. Now I keep them unopened in a shoebox. Maybe someday I'll read them. Maybe not. I have the right to protect my peace of mind. Jasmine disappeared from town immediately after the trial. Someone told me she moved to the city and changed her name. I don't blame her. Carrying the last name of a murderer must not be easy. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what Charles was planning, if she was a silent accomplice to Ernest's murder. But those questions belong to the past, and I have learned to live in the present. The town of Spring Creek will never forget the case. It has become a local legend, a story that parents tell their children as a warning about greed and betrayal. Some see me as a hero, others as a cruel woman who sent her own sons to prison. I don't care what they think. I know the truth, and the truth has given me the peace I needed. My health remains surprisingly good for my age. The doctor says it's because I was finally able to free myself from the stress and sadness I was carrying. The body heals when the heart finds peace, he explained during my last checkup. Sunday mornings are my favorite. I cut fresh flowers from my garden and walked to the cemetery to visit Ernest's grave. His headstone now has an inscription that I had engraved after the trial. Ernest Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than his death. I tell him everything that has happened during the week. I talk to him about the foundation, about the families we have helped, about the thank you letters I receive from people who found justice thanks to our story. I swear I can feel his approval in the wind that moves the leaves of the nearby trees. "Do you know what's strangest, my love?" I said during my last visit. "I no longer feel pain when I think of Charles and Henry. I only feel pity. Pity because they had all the love in the world and they chose hate. They had a family that adored them and they chose betrayal. They had the opportunity to be honorable men like you and they chose to be murderers." Last week, a reporter from the city came to interview me for a documentary about family crimes. She asked me if there was anything I wanted to say to other people who might be going through similar situations. "Family is not an excuse for crime," I replied. "Love is not blind. Love with boundaries is true love. If someone who says they love you is capable of harming you for money or convenience, that person doesn't really love you, and it is never, ever too late to seek justice, no matter who the culprit is." This year, on the 5th anniversary of Ernest's death, I organized a special ceremony in his memory. More than 200 people came: neighbors, members of the foundation, families we have helped, local authorities. It was beautiful to see how his death, which began as a tragedy, had become a force for good in so many lives. Stephen gave an emotional speech. Ernest Hayes died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives on in every family that finds justice thanks to his wife's courage. Evil tried to destroy his story, but good turned it into hope for others. At night, before I go to sleep, I sometimes take out the old photographs from when Charles and Henry were children. I see them playing in the yard, hugging their father, laughing with me on past Christmases. I allow myself to cry for those innocent children who once existed before greed completely corrupted them. But I no longer cry for the men they became. Those men chose their destiny. My story ended up being bigger than my personal tragedy. It has become a symbol that justice is possible, even when it comes from the most unexpected sources. A 66-year-old widow proved that truth is more powerful than lies, that true love is stronger than betrayal, and that it is never too late to do the right thing. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and Stephen will come for coffee, as always. I'll make his favorite pastry and tell him about the thank you letters that arrived this week. Afterward, we'll work together in the garden, planting new flowers for spring. Life goes on, more simple but more authentic than before. I have learned that true family is not about shared blood, but about shared values, mutual respect, and a love that never turns into harm. Ernest, wherever you are, I hope you know that I kept the promise I made to you by your grave that terrible day. I found the truth, I sought justice, and I turned our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.